All right, everyone, get ready because today we're doing a deep dive into some seriously interesting and, let's be honest, kind of unsettling stuff. You sent in these excerpts from the Estonian Internal Security Services yearbook, the one for 2023-2024, and wow, talk about a crash course in modern espionage. Makes you really think about the threats Estonia is facing, especially with everything going on in Ukraine.
Yeah, and you know what really stands out to me is how this yearbook, it goes way beyond just your typical military threats. It's like they're laying bare a whole playbook of how hybrid warfare is being used to, well, to destabilize the whole country.
Yeah, you said it. It's like they're playing chess and the other side is stuck playing checkers, always like multiple steps ahead, using every tactic in the book. And speaking of tactics, this whole section on constitutional order protection really got my attention. Remember that time I fell for that fake news story about the talking cat? Imagine that, but like on a national scale. This report, it's highlighting the Kagu-Esti region that's in southeast Estonia and how some of the issues there, they make it vulnerable to this kind of manipulation.
It's true, and the report, it really digs into how economic hardship and lack of opportunities, it can be weaponized.
Yeah.
It's used to stir discontent, especially among people who feel like maybe the Estonian government's forgotten about them.
So it's about taking advantage of vulnerabilities that already exist, turning frustration into like a weapon.
Precisely. This isn't just about spreading random disinformation. It's about crafting narratives, stories that resonate with people's fears and anxieties. And the yearbook, it gives this chilling example of the backlash against the NATO presence in Voruma.
Oh, right, right. The whole thing with the rumors about the Allied soldiers. I remember reading about that.
What happened there was a very calculated campaign. They took advantage of existing tensions, using social media to spread these false stories and create distrust towards NATO forces.
It's scary how effective that kind of thing can be, especially when they tap into fields that people already have. You see it everywhere now, not just in Estonia. It's like a virus spreading this misinformation and just eating away at trust.
And that's exactly the point. This isn't just about making NATO look bad. It's about shaking Estonia's sense of security, making them doubt that siding with the West was the right move.
Yeah, it's about projecting strength, for sure, and keeping Estonia and its allies guessing. But you know what often gets lost in all this geopolitical maneuvering? The human cost. This report doesn't shy away from that, like when it talks about the people caught in the middle, facing these impossible choices.
It's true. And that brings us to what the report calls loyalty dilemmas. It's easy to talk about governments and borders, but what about the actual people living with this tension every single day? The report specifically talks about the pressure on people working in Estonia's IT sector, a lot of whom have ties to Russia. It's tough to imagine, right, being in that position, having to choose between your job, your livelihood, and pressure from the Russian government.
I can't even imagine getting a call like that asking me to choose gives me chills just thinking about it.
It's this subtle form of pressure, but so effective and can take so many forms. The report even mentions cases where people are being forced to give up their Russian citizenship or else face consequences back home. It really highlights how this conflict, it gets so personal.
It's true. And speaking of personal stakes, the report goes into this really unsettling example, the case of Professor Morozov, who they suspected of espionage. Talk about betrayal.
That case is a perfect illustration of how vulnerable you are when someone in a position of power, they could be pressured, blackmailed. It really underscores why strong vetting processes are so important. And constant vigilance, of course.
And that actually leads us right into the digital world. As if those real-world threats weren't enough, the cybersecurity section is, well, it's a bit terrifying. Honestly, it's making me wonder if even my water heater is safe anymore.
Right. The report really emphasizes how much more sophisticated and audacious these cyber attacks against Estonia are becoming, especially targeting crucial infrastructure. Remember that time my power went out for like a whole week? I swear I lived on cereal and takeout. It was rough. Now imagine that, but for the entire country, that's the level of disruption we're talking about.
Let's hope they still have takeout, right?
Exactly. And this report, it specifically mentions that attack on the Estonian water and heating systems, remember, done by Iranian hackers, no less. That whole incident, it exposed a huge vulnerability that keeps cybersecurity experts up at night. Industrial control systems.
So even just basic stuff like turning on the faucet or changing the thermostat, that could be a target. That's unsettling, to say the least. What exactly are these supply chain attacks anyway? The report mentions them, but I'm not totally clear on what they are.
Okay, picture this. There's a piece of software, seems harmless, right, used by the Estonian government. But hidden inside, there's a back door. And this back door, it was put there by someone who wants to do harm maybe by hacking the software company itself. Suddenly, this everyday program, it's a weapon, giving access to sensitive data, networks. That's a supply chain attack.
It does sound like something straight out of a spy movie. And you wouldn't even know who to blame, would you? Could be anyone, anywhere.
Exactly. And it highlights how these threats, they can emerge from anywhere in the world, often in ways we don't expect. And speaking of unexpected threats, there's another one the report brings up that I wouldn't have necessarily associated with Estonia Islamic extremism.
That's a good point. It really shows how, in our interconnected world, you can't just rely on geography for safety anymore. These conflicts, even ones happening far away, they have ripple effects that reach much farther than anyone expects. Like what
Yeah.
the report was saying about the Hamas-Israel conflict and the impact it's had on Estonia's own security landscape, right? It's like that butterfly effect idea, but instead of a butterfly flapping its wings, it's a conflict happening halfway around the world.
Precisely. And while Estonia might seem geographically distant from the Middle East, the report points to this worrying trend. People with no history of extremist views suddenly becoming radicalized online. The conflict in Gaza, especially with social media and all the online propaganda, it shows how quickly these extremist ideologies can take root, even in places you wouldn't expect.
And once those ideas take hold, it feels almost impossible to combat them. Can't really build a wall around the internet, can you?
It's a huge challenge, no doubt.
Yeah.
It requires a multi-pronged approach, combining classic counterterrorism tactics with a deeper understanding of how online radicalization happens, what drives it.
I'm curious, though, how does all this tie into terrorist financing? The report touched on that, too. I thought we were talking about online extremism.
Excellent question. And it gets at another layer of complexity in all of this. You see, the line between the digital world and the real world, it's blurrier than ever, especially when it comes to funding terrorist activities. The report specifically warns about the difficulties in tracking financial flows now, particularly with cryptocurrency becoming more common.
So it's not just about tracking down physical cash anymore.
Exactly. Cryptocurrency makes it incredibly tough to differentiate between legitimate donations, like for humanitarian aid, and money that might end up supporting terrorist groups, especially since these funds are often moving through decentralized, anonymous networks. It's a constant game of cat and mouse, and the people up to no good, they're always finding new ways to stay one step ahead.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from tensions at the border and cyber threats to espionage and how terrorism is changing. It seems like Estonia is facing a whole buffet of security challenges. Right, we have covered a ton. Border tensions, cyber threats, espionage, the changing face of terrorism. Sounds like Estonia's got a full plate of security challenges, to say the least. But it's not just about, like, listing out threats, is it? What does this all actually mean for Estonia, and why should our listener even care about all of this?
That's the million-dollar question. What's important to remember here is these aren't just isolated incidents. It's a deliberate strategy, carefully coordinated. Think of it like, I don't know, a constant pressure campaign.
Yeah.
Always testing, always probing for weaknesses.
So it's about keeping Estonia on edge, creating a sense of uncertainty, like never letting them feel completely secure.
Exactly. And it's not just contained to Estonia's borders either. These hybrid warfare tactics, they're being used across Europe, especially targeting countries that border Russia. The goal is to sow discord within NATO itself, to weaken those alliances from within.
So even though we're zeroing in on Estonia, this has implications way beyond, impacting regional and global security as a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the most effective part is that it takes advantage of the very systems that are supposed to protect democratic societies. Freedom of speech, open borders, relying on technology and interconnectedness.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But it's also kind of a depressing thought. I mean, if these tactics are so effective, what can even be done to counter them? It's like trying to, catch smoke.
It's definitely a complex challenge, but it's not impossible to overcome. One of the most important steps is simply awareness. Reports like this one, even though they're alarming, they're so valuable. By bringing these tactics to light, they become harder to use effectively.
So knowledge is power, as they say.
100%. The more we understand these threats, the better we can prepare for them and fight back. But it's not just about government agencies and intelligence reports. This is where everyone has a role to play.
So you're saying it's not just spies and soldiers anymore, it's about everyday people being informed and aware of what's going on.
Exactly. Think about it. Every time you share an article online, you're playing a part in how information spreads. If you take a moment to consider the source, look for any biases, be cautious of things that seem overly emotional, you're less likely to be manipulated.
So it's about being a more critical consumer of information, especially in the online world.
Precisely. And the same applies to cybersecurity. A little bit of healthy skepticism goes a long way. Don't just click on random links. Be wary of phishing scams, and always remember, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
My grandma always used to say, trust but verify. Still holds up.
There you go. And, it's those small actions taken by everyone that can really build up a society's resilience to these evolving threats. It's about fostering a culture of critical thinking, where questioning assumptions and looking for multiple perspectives become second nature.
Well said. And on that note, a huge thank you to you for sending in this thought-provoking stuff. We hope this deep dive has given you a better grasp of the complex challenges that Estonia faces, and in a lot of ways, the challenges that we all face.
And as you keep exploring these issues, remember that knowledge is most powerful when it's shared. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues about what you've learned. Start conversations, challenge those assumptions, and encourage others to stay informed.
Stay curious out there, everyone. Keep asking those tough questions and never underestimate the power of an informed citizen. Until next time, happy deep diving.